Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the 8th Annual Words Festival from London, Ontario, and the surrounding region. I'm Janice Zolf, your host tonight, your interviewer with Linden MacIntyre. Looking forward to, we've had 300 people plus sign up, so you're in an exclusive club at probably the best literary festival, I was going to say Canada, but let's just use the planet, because I've been involved since the beginning. I think I'm allowed to say that. And so great to have you with us. We're going to get going in just a few moments. But first, I'd like to acknowledge that London is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenapehouk, and the Attawandaron peoples, on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. This land continues to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples, for example, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. Well, many of us know Linden MacIntyre from Canada's best investigative television show, The Fifth Estate, where he was host for 25 years, producing and reporting on some of Canada's most notorious criminal cases, including Guy Paul Moran and the Christine Jessup case and Stephen Truscott. But we also think of Linden MacIntyre as one of Canada's most recognized authors. He's put away his investigative skills, or maybe merged them, to write now about intriguing characters in books that have captured many of us over the last 15 years. And Linden, I may be a little generous with that number. Some of the books: Punishment, The Only Cafe, The Wake, and his Giller Prize winning novel, The Bishop's Man. And Linden, you know, I wrote on my calendar when I read an article in the Globe and Mail in June, I think, what books there were to look forward to this summer. I wrote August, Linden MacIntyre, The Winter Wives. And just in case I forgot, the first day that it was out on the shelves in bookstores and libraries. So I think you've earned the anticipation and excitement after all these novels, certainly with this one. And I should mention you've had 15 Gemini Awards, 1 Giller Prize, an Emmy Award, and numerous other awards. So it's time, really, you know, if we were here in person, we would have 2 minutes of applause as you made your way to the stage. So, you know, I can either cue the applause track, or we'll take up the 2 minutes.
I would run away. I would. Anyways, let me thank you, Janice. Before you get too over the top with all this, it's lovely to be here at the London Festival. I've been here before, and it's a great event, and it's a great place, and I would love to be there in person. Yeah. Got a lot of friends and in that region, and I would find plenty to do after the interview. But anyway, here I am in Toronto, and I'm looking forward to talking to you again. We talked before, but in the same room, but not like this. But anyway, this is better than nothing. So
it's great. It's great, and you know, to get 300 people is wonderful, and that we owe a lot to Josh Lambier, the organizer of this incredible event. But you know, it's worked out to an advantage because we get people from outside London that can't travel in, that really want to hear what you have to say. So it's always show and tell time. This is the book Winter Wives, and you know, interesting, if you look at that cover, it looks like a hot, steamy romantic novel.
That's the intention, I suppose. I had nothing to do with the cover.
Okay, I didn't think
marketing, you know what, they have absolutely no boundaries. So whatever, but there is a little bit of hot, steamy relationship stuff in there. So it's not a completely flat psychological thriller, as somebody has said.
Not at all. And when I read it in the summer, I was intrigued by the plot, carried by the story. And then when I read it again just before this interview, I was much more intrigued with the characters. And I realized the depth that the characters have. They're complicated. They're complex. They're intriguing. And let's begin by talking about Byron, who's the narrator of The Winter Wives, and who he is.
Well, you know what? I think a surprising number of guys would quietly identify with Byron, although he's not the sort of person any male alpha type would want to identify with. He's a misfit in many ways. He was injured seriously in a childhood accident, as a result of which he never went to school. And school and the community and just the normal interaction with other people is how we grow and become social animals. And he had none of that. He lived with his mom and dad on a little farm in the middle of nowhere. And then his dad died suddenly and left him and his mom. And it was like, it was a peculiar way to grow up to adolescence. And then suddenly, with all the homeschooling and all the various correspondence courses completed, he has to go to school. He goes to high school. And I think anybody who's been through high school will agree that that's not a great place to introduce yourself to sort of social development or some form of socialization. But that's where he ended up. Now, fortunately, as a farm boy, a seasonal fisherman who knows how to drive a boat and do stuff that other people kind of like, well, they find kind of mystifying. He's got his dad's old truck. Now he's a sort of a different kind of a high school student, so that nobody bugs him. Mm-hmm. But there's one young woman in the school. She's kind of like the most popular girl there. She's like everybody's fantasy girlfriend, and she gets interested in him. But because of his lack of any kind of socialization, he can't read anything into this. He just doesn't know what that means. Mm-hmm. Is she just curious about his limp? She's the one that his name isn't Byron, but she names him Byron after the poet who had a limp. Is she just kind of interested in my limp, or is she just interested because she thinks I'm weird? Mm-hmm. And so it all starts out from that. He forms a peculiar friendship with someone that you would think was the absolute opposite. He's a big, tall city guy. He's a campus stud, athlete. Everybody knows who he is. His name is Allan Chase, and they call him the Great Chase. And he finds something in this Byron that attracts him. And Byron, of course, as young guys who don't really have a lot of personal experience, you kind of look up to people like Allan. He's an athlete, he's a star, and you kind of envy. So these two guys, for peculiar reasons, they envy one another, mm-hmm. And so the bonds are formed. Everybody's high school sweetheart has a sister, Annie, who is not like Annie, but she's somebody special. They're both extremely smart women. And these four come together very early in life in a relationship that very early in life, as most of us experience, it seems to be something that will be forever, and it will be always like it is when you're a teenager. Mm-hmm. We will sort of be best friends forever, and we will always be like this. We will know each other as well as we know each other now. But as life unfolds, you suddenly realize you never know people the way you thought you did. Mm-hmm. We never know ourselves the way we thought we did. And that presents us with various challenges with ourselves as we come to learn things about ourselves that we didn't know. Challenges with our very best friends, our partners, whatever. We start to learn things as life changes us and as we develop in life. And then, of course, the relationships are always challenging. And that's how the book unfolds.
But in many cases, when you think that you're going to be in that teenage bubble for life and those are going to be your friends for life, they don't last and they evaporate because people go their separate ways. And even though Byron and Allan are so very different, they continue to interact. I mean, there's some gap times, but they grow closer.
I think the denominator in this case is the fact that each of these guys sees in the other person mm-hmm. an essential quality that they would like to have. Allan is poised. Allan is cool. Mm-hmm. He's capable. Byron, on the other hand, is cool, but for a whole different reason, because he doesn't seem to have any dependency on the world. He has his own little place on a little farm. He doesn't really need people. He doesn't really, from Allan's point of view, he's got a kind of an independence and a sort of an understanding of who he is, Allan thinks, mm-hmm. that Allan would like to have. So there's an essential connection between these two guys that is so important to the both of them that they will never let go of it. no matter where Allan goes, no matter what he gets into, he will always regard Byron as the sort of one of the anchors in his life. Byron, on the other hand, even if he doesn't really know where Allan is or what he's into, will consider Allan to be the kind of man that Byron would always love to have become. I don't think this is a really unusual dynamic among men. I think men are constantly looking for the manly attributes of other men that they would love to have, and it does create certain attractions and certain relationships. And in this particular case, perhaps the absence of constant contact keeps it going more than if they were seeing each other every single day someplace.
But Allan becomes involved in criminal activities. He gets into the laundry business.
No, he does. Yes.
So, and I love how you called it the laundry business. And of course, it's money laundering. And do you want to explain that and exactly what Allan is up to?
I don't want to give away the whole book, Janice, but I mean, what Byron comes to understand fairly early on is that Allan has decided on an unconventional career path, whereas Byron has decided on a very conventional career path. He's going to be a lawyer.
Right.
Allan is going to do whatever it takes to become independent. I think Allan's great goal in life is to have become independent of systems and institutions. And of course, maybe I'm dreaming here, but I mean, to develop a life that's totally independent of institutions and sort of the rat race and the rules, it usually involves going into some shadowy and dangerous places. And this, of course, is what Allan does. He goes into shadowy, dangerous places, and he survives in there. And Byron has a sort of a general idea of what he's up to, but Byron just chooses, as lawyers will do. Like, you know what? I'm the lawyer until he breaks a law. Then I'm not interested. And until he's convicted of having broken a law, it doesn't matter. So whatever Allan is up to, fine, that's his business, and I'm going to stay away from it. And eventually, Byron is drawn into it unavoidably because of a health or sort of a collapse in Allan's health. So the breaking of the law breaking and the criminal activity by Allan initially in the first part of the relationship with Byron is irrelevant, because Byron, look, as long as you're not really creating social mayhem, I don't care what you do. And then when Byron becomes a lawyer associated with him, it's, well, look, you're innocent until proven guilty and nobody's charged you with anything, so we're cool. The two women, of course, are in the same mix. One is married to Allan, and one is married, the one that Byron really was obsessed with is married to Allan, and her sister's married to Byron, and they're accountants. And if there are accountants in the crowd, I think they'll appreciate that if you're somebody's accountant, like, you want to see the numbers add up in the right columns, you want to see all the right bills paid, you do not want to see collection agencies, you do not want to see government auditors coming along. As long as all these things are fitting into the right boxes, everything is all right. Where the money is coming from is another matter, as long as it's not flagrant, as long as it doesn't have sort of blood dripping off it. Just keep your head up. So all these things, Allan's criminal behavior, which becomes a problem for everybody at a certain point in the story, up until that point is just his business. And as long as he doesn't make a mess of things, as long as he's not stupid about stuff, and he's far from stupid, everybody's fine.
How did you come up with Sisters, the Winter Wives? I mean, first of all, it's kind of a double entendre, the title. It's a bit, you're not sure what that means, the Winter Wives. Is it, are these seasonal women?
Yeah. See, the book starts on a golf course. I mean, you could say, oh, these are two golf widows.
Yeah.
They're guys when the golf course is under snow. It's not like that. I don't know. I like the winter. I named them winter because they had a certain chill about them in the best sense of the word. You know, Annie was a very cool to the point of cold woman, and Peggy was hot, but with a coolness around the heat, and she was sort of the epitome of what an awful lot of young guys really just go crazy about when they encounter it in early life. And so these two women become in the lives of these two men the architecture of everything. Without those two women present, it would all collapse. Both Byron and Allan, as the story reveals, are really flawed and in many ways doomed people. Yeah. Byron, for a whole bunch of reasons that we know about from day one, and Allan, for reasons that we only find out about 2/3 of the way into the story. I mean, these are guys who are just heading for the precipice, no matter what. And it's the presence of these two women in their lives who delay the process of arriving at the precipice and give them enough time, or certainly give Byron enough time to get his act together, to grow up a little bit, and to be ready for the inevitable crisis that will come because of how Allan has lived his life.
I'm really curious, before I forget to come back to the Winter Wives, how you even come up with, like, what happens first? You say, it feels right to create these characters, these two women who are very smart. One's kind of hot, one's kind of cool, and they're the architects of this quartet. But is there an aha moment where you say, I'm going to call them the Winter?
No, I think that I've always been intrigued by smart, strong women. I grew up with them. Matter of fact, I grew up with nothing else. I had a father who, you know, he was strong in ways that you only understand when you're all grown up yourself. He was very quiet to the point of sort of absence. And he was in his own way an extremely strong guy, as he demonstrated to me about 3 times in my life. He was decisive and he was strong. But the women were ubiquitous. I grew up in a house where the father was absent most of the time, with an extremely strong mother. And her mother, who was even stronger, came to live with us for half of the year. I had 2 sisters, and I had my mother's sister living not far away, and she was yet stronger. And so in school, I had nothing but women teachers until I hit university practically. And so it was absolutely like this presence, constant presence around me of women who were, you do not like, I knew early on in my life that women have a more challenging existence than men do in many cases. And when you have a bunch of women or a woman who is sort of just trying to hold everything together, in the presence of all these structural, institutional, cultural challenges that women have that men don't, that's going to be a strong woman. And you do not mess with that strong woman. You do not cross her, or
this
you will
is how you can write authentically about strong women, because you understand them.
Well, I don't know. I would never claim, you know, a strong woman will jump up and say, you don't understand us. So I'm not going to claim that.
Okay.
It's too perilous. But I will say that I'm interested enough to be curious about them in a permanent way. And I'm brave enough to ask questions and to inquire about where does this strength come from? And I try to build whatever I discover, you know, like when I reflect on that, what makes this, where does this strength come from against so many odds and so many barriers to the exercise of power? You sort of, you know, whether it, personal power or even now more in society and in business and in politics. But once upon a time it was personal power that sort of defined the woman's influence. But nowadays it's a bit more general. But I'm awfully curious about the process of how women exercise power. And in this book, they've exercised power to the point where the power ran out. And it wasn't their fault that it ran out because of the guy that they believed to be something that he wasn't.
You mentioned curiosity, and I guess going back to your journalism career, to have an inquiring mind, which you must have as a journalist, how does that position you as a novelist? How is your journalism career and the way you approached your stories infiltrate the way you write your books?
Mostly in technique. Journalism booted me off the curb into the heavy traffic of experience. Into situations and places that I probably would never have gone to. Put me in the way of a whole lot of really interesting people that I would never have otherwise met. Required me to listen to people, required me to constantly ask questions to find out as much as I needed to know in order to tell a story. But mostly, I suppose the biggest value is that, especially in TV, I was required to listen for two reasons. One is to listen to hear what you're going to, people talk in circles as I'm a living example, but somewhere in what is said, among all the words, there is what is meant. And so in journalism, you're constantly listening for what is meant, what is important and what is relevant to people who are not in this room. Mm-hmm. And you learn to do that, or you just don't last long. The other thing that I learned in journalism, and again, especially in television, is the necessity of taking what you learn and compressing it into a really simple and concise expression of sometimes a very complex idea. But the thing that really helped me is I love dialogue. This was a story I wanted to tell mostly in dialogue. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to write a play or a screenplay, but I wanted to write a novel, but I wanted it to be very heavy in dialogue. And working in journalism and again in television, you understand after a while just how interesting it is the way people express themselves, mm-hmm. how they talk, how they take their feelings and convert them into expressions and words, and how they prevaricate, how they say things they don't plan to say. You learn to listen for that. And so I think I came away from television with an ear. Some people have an ear for music. I have an ear for dialogue. And I wanted to put it to work in this particular book. I wanted to tell as much of the other, there's so much in this book that's so deep and complicated that it would take me 800 pages of analysis and stuff that would bore people into another realm. I just wanted to do it with interesting voices saying interesting things.
But with a dialogue heavy book like this with interesting voices, the characters get inside your head because you feel the character through their voice. And, in Byron's case, he doubts himself a lot. He's a victim of his past to a certain extent with his limp and the accident that he had, but he's also becoming a victim of his future. So, then delve into Alzheimer's or the possibility of
Yes, look, he has a lot of handicaps. The leg is the least of his handicaps. Having grown up in total social isolation, that has created probably the biggest handicap, because it's in our context with other people that we learn a lot about ourselves. We learn a lot about what we want to be and what we don't want to be. And Byron had none of that experience. So he has to sort of struggle along, and he begins to realize that he's got a lot of deficiencies that he's never going to be able to fix. And then along comes this idea, the notion he has that he's got early onset dementia. And you know what? It's a perverse thing, but at a certain point he says, well, that explains everything, or that will explain everything to all the people who see me as a strange person. They're going to say, oh, well, that's the answer to that. He has early onset dementia. It was really, it started when he was like 10. It explains why he's a misfit. Mm-hmm. And he can sort of not think about the ultimate tragic disintegration, physical and mental, that will happen as Alzheimer's or dementia evolve. He begins to get a taste of it when he watches his friend Allan go down that chute. But for him, for a certain period of time, Alzheimer's, dementia, whatever it's going to lead to, it explains a whole lot to him about why he is the way he is, because he's been looking for really deep and unanswerable questions for a long time that might explain what happened before that accident that took away his physical mobility. What went on there? There was a moment that was suddenly obscured by something else, by a couple of other things, and he can never get back to that moment that defined the rest of his life. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden, somebody, some online ancestry source says, "Oh yeah, you got early onset, you got a genetic predisposition to this," and suddenly for Byron, oh well, that explains everything, or it will certainly give me an excuse for everything.
To write about money laundering, you either have to have been a money launderer, do impeccable research, or have encountered money laundering as a journalist. And I suspect it's the latter.
Well, I have. It's not as arcane as, the thing about money laundering, like most successful non-violent crime, is that it has to be simple and straightforward, and it has to be kind of like something that's happening before your eyes and you just don't even know it. Mm-hmm. I was having a meeting one night with an accountant in a downtown Bay Street office in Toronto, and we were getting near the end of the business. And I said to him, I'm researching money laundering. How would you sort of like describe it in the last couple of minutes we have here? And he looked at me and he says, "Turn around, look out the window." So I turned around, it was evening, and right across where there used to be a parking lot, there was a huge building of some kind going up. He says, "That's money laundering." I said, "Well, how can you say that?" He says, "I just know." He says, "I can tell by the lack of activity or the kind of activity. That is a building that's going up for no purpose other than for the concealment of ill-gotten money." Mm-hmm. And he said, you can dig into it, you can find out who's building it and where the money came from, and then you come back in a few weeks or a month or whatever, and then look at who, and it'll all have changed. That building that you're looking at will change hands 3 or 4 times or more over the next year. And that's what happens. That's where the money sort of suddenly gets churned up and redistributed and spread all over the place, so that you would have to be an ingenious accountant or police officer or whatever. And unfortunately, most police officers who have to deal with it are not ingenious about these kinds of transactions. Mm-hmm. And you just sort of keep that money moving around and in one pocket, out another pocket, into another pocket, and it's called money laundering. I mean, the simple and most blunt form of it is the casino. Mm-hmm. A lot of people go to casino with cash. Casinos are dealing with massive amounts of cash. You funnel a little stream of dirty money into that stream of mostly legitimate money, and then out the other end comes all legitimate money, mm-hmm. including your dirty money. And then when we have, as is highly publicized lately, that whole offshore secret banking system, where everything else, works, and you just sort of put the hose in that direction, and you put it into an offshore bank where the laws of the little country are enclosed in secrecy. It's going on all the time. We never 100% get our hands on it. That's why it is such a successful international crime right now. Mm-hmm. It's almost it's not like there's bloody bodies laying around. Sometimes there are because somebody screws somebody else, but most of the time it's just going on around us, and we have absolutely no way of putting our finger on just where it's criminal or not.
So when you have that meeting with your accountant on Bay Street and he points to the window, does that somehow make it into the book? Like his description of the building changing hands 2 or 3 times, is that become part of Allan's way of doing business?
Yes, and it is. To see Allan, I don't know how far down the narrative road I want to go, but Allan is earning money in a really blunt and criminal way for a very long period of time. Then he reaches a point where he just wants to use that money, and to his great credit, he wants to use it for good things. Mm-hmm. He wants to put that money to work to make the world a better place, and so he somehow has to launder that money so that it doesn't draw a lot of attention to himself. And then, of course, this is where the women and the accountant, the lawyer, come in. So he's in the process of trying to legitimize all that ill-gotten gain, and then it all falls apart because of his personal and physical disabilities.
But Byron at some point has to confront his own views of himself as a lawyer, as a law man.
Mm-hmm.
And is he willing ethically to cross the line?
Byron has to confront an awful lot of shortcomings in his personality and his character. At a certain point in this development, the whole question of the legality of the money that he's trying to manage for Allan, it becomes a small part of the whole thing, and that is part of the murkiness that gets kind of protected by this veil of dementia that he thinks he has available to him, and then he thinks that he just might be able to keep that charade going when he is told in a clinical way that it doesn't exist, the veil doesn't exist. But in the minds of everybody around him, it exists, because people understand now, there's something wrong with him, and we now know what it is. Well, so now he knows, no, but is he going to let them in on this change in his personal circumstance? And then that becomes a device which will get him and everybody else out of fairly serious difficulty.
Home is very important in this book, and the characters mention home all the time, and home changes. Peggy and Annie say, "Come home."
Yeah.
To Toronto.
Yeah.
And going home to Cape Breton. So what does home mean to you, and why does it figure so prominently in your stories?
Well, home is in everything that every time I create characters for a story, home is going to be one of them. The landscape is going to be one of them, because it does in many ways define who you are. Home is a very complicated idea. It's just not landscape, although landscape is vitally important. It's more important than we think. Mm-hmm. Just the nature, is there an ocean? Is there a mountain? Is there a desert? Is there just a metropolis? I mean, these are things that have a great effect on who we think we are, how we evolve into adults. And so I believe that just the nature of the place is extremely important in the development of personality. I think that in many cases, and I suppose maybe in remote places and small communities, home becomes a metaphor for some form of confidence that we know people, mm-hmm. confidence that we know what we can depend on, or we know where the potholes are. Like I grew up in a little place that sometimes I grew up in the East Coast, Atlantic Canada, where there's a certain sense that it has, and I really resent that. I mean, it certainly has this sort of a moral quality about it, which it doesn't have. What it has about it is a sociological reality of small places, and in small places, people depend on one another. So in small places, you are obliged, out of self-interest, to be civil mm-hmm. to your neighbor, because you're going to need that neighbor in the absence of institutional availability. You're going to need the neighbor. You're going to need the person down the road to pull you out of the ditch, or to look after you when you get sick, or to be aware of when you're sick. So you sort of work at civility a bit more in those places. And it, as we get older and we get involved in more complex situations, we kind of get nostalgic about that quality mm-hmm. and yearn to go back to it.
So, but in the case of the East Coast, it's not every small town. There's a warmth of the people in the East Coast from where you're from that is more tangible, I think.
Yeah, but I do believe it's rooted in, I don't want to be too cynical about it, but it is rooted in a sense of our community, our sort of capital C community. Like, we are all members of a community, and we are all dependent on one another. and perhaps the warmth comes from a certain sense of confidence
Mhm.
that when all else fails, we will be taken care of, not by the government, not necessarily by some large company, corporation. We will be taken care of by one another when
Mhm.
all fails. And that sort of generates a kind of, I don't know, a certain fraternity or a certain sense of community that may translate into warmth. Sometimes I don't feel very warm on the East Coast. And sometimes I just feel this sort of sentimental kind of current running through me when I'm there, and I see what's familiar. I see what I know, and when we're in the presence of what we know well, we tend to feel a little bit more secure than
Mhm.
when we're in the middle of something that's absolutely strange and threatening.
What is the difference in storytelling between writing as a journalist and writing novels for you
Well,
personally?
I think storytelling is the key. It's all storytelling. I mean, there are certain obligations in journalism that you can defer in fiction. I mean, the idea that everything in journalism is absolutely true
Mhm.
is false. In journalism, you strive for accuracy and fairness. Those are the key elements in journalism. Accuracy and fairness. And if you want to be unfair, if you want to be, you can never be inaccurate, but you can be, and you can never actually go back on that. You can never be unfair, but sometimes you can be critical and sometimes you can be harsh. But you always have to have the facts as best you can get your hands on them. In
Mhm.
fiction, and one of the reasons I believe fiction can get closer to the truth than journalism or nonfiction is because you can mentally burrow down into the character of the person that you are using as an actor in your story.
Mhm.
You can make interpretations, you can draw conclusions that you would never get away with
Mhm.
in journalism.
Mhm.
And I think journalism does introduce you to enough people in enough complicated situations that you feel comfortable and competent in diving into a psyche. But at the end of the exercise, it's always your own psyche that you're diving down and swimming around in.
Mhm.
And you have to do that with the sense that we are at a certain deep level as people. We're all basically emotionally, psychologically the same. And so the Bishop's Man was I took on, I entered the heart and spirit of a priest, and I'd never been a priest.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I realized that what is a priest but just another guy with a whole lot of specific training and
Mhm.
a lot of acquired attitudes and a culture that is obscure for most of us. So if I can imagine my way through all that superficial stuff and get to the core of who he is, then I can probably represent the personality and the thinking of a man who was a priest. In another novel, my protagonist was a woman. I did not have the courage to write it in the first person, but I knew that I had to somehow burrow down through the character to find a common human place, and then work back from there and to take account of the female experience as it affects that fundamental human quality, and then to speak
Is
from her
that why men lie?
man line and speak from her point of view without actually putting words in her mouth
Mhm.
or pretending that I could actually be her. I could not be her in
Mhm.
1,000 years, but I can reflect what she thinks simply because I've known a lot of women and because way down at some deep level of our personalities, there is a man and a woman. I mean, I think way down deep, and this is becoming a far more contemporary notion, but at a
Mhm.
certain level of our reality, we are by everything. I mean, we are trans everything. We are, we have a common kind of experience of the world.
Is identity strong, do you think, in everything that you do? Is it there always a question about identity?
Yeah, identity is sort of the cornerstone, I think, for me and for an awful lot of people I've known.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is for a lot of people generally. As the book suggests, and as Allan says occasionally, our persona is what we show the world. Mm-hmm. Persona is the clothing. Persona is the hairstyle. Persona is like the cosmetic. And you know, we can play with that, and we can shape it into what we want people to see in us, mm-hmm. and hope that they won't dig too deep. Because in the identity, there's probably a lot of stuff we don't really want to share. So, and for most relationships and most situations, that persona is good enough. You don't really have to go beyond it.
As a journalist, when I think of some of the interviews that you did, and you were interviewing murderers, or you were interviewing convicted criminals in various lines of work, I guess, for lack of a better description, in order to do your job well as a journalist, you had to dig beneath the persona, and listen and engage that person so that they would trust you to reveal who they are or what's beneath the persona.
Well, there are not many ways of getting beyond the persona into the identity, but one of them is not to seem to be threatening. Mm-hmm. One of them is to seem to have a certain compassion, a certain empathy. When I'm sitting in a visiting space at a corrections institution, as I have done, I'm not sitting in front of somebody. First of all, he's going to have to understand that I accept your persona, but I don't buy it. I want to get, I want to get beyond it. But I want you to understand, I'm not trying to get beyond it for any nefarious reasons, because I think that maybe if the world can access your identity and your true self, mm-hmm. You will find a higher level of acceptance and empathy for what you really are. And I've been in that situation a number of times, and it's strange the number of occasions where you're sitting with a real hard person, and when he senses, and you can't fake it, in the communication, he or she will sense this person genuinely wants to know deeply into myself for the right reason, not to sort of pin me to the wall. Mm-hmm. And I think that, without really having analyzed it a whole lot in my work, I found that to be kind, I suppose, or to seem to be non-judgmental, is to get deeper into someone's reality than if you're sort of coming on there with your finger pointing. Mm-hmm. And this is not always, like I know what I'm doing. And the thing is that we both have to know what's going on here. But I remember sitting in a jail cell one day with Guy Paul Morin, who had been sentenced to life in prison for the most vile kind of crime. And by the time I left there, I said to my colleague that this guy does not belong here. He allowed me past the persona. Mm-hmm. The persona was strange. The persona was what got him on in there, because he was eccentric, and the law does not really have a lot of patience with eccentricity. Mm-hmm. His eccentricities were just so mild and innocent and silly but it was enough to put him in jail for the rest of his life. Mm-hmm. And somehow, in the course of a very, very long conversation, I kind of like get down below that, into this, who this guy really is, and I came away completely shaken by it. And I'll never forget coming out of Kingston Pen that day. There was a hardened old corrections officer out in the front, and he says, you were in with Moran today. And I said, yeah, I was. What did you think? I said, he doesn't belong here, I said. He says, oh, well, I'll take you you come back next week and I'll take you to another guy who doesn't belong here. His name is Clifford Olson.
Wow.
They're all the same, buddy. You come and do my job for a little while. And I said, well, actually, maybe I should. Because if you're that friggin' cynical, then there's something wrong somewhere in you and in the system.
But Guy Paul Morin, he touched you in that way, and he didn't belong there. And then after you retired as a journalist, you came back.
Yeah.
When he was exonerated.
Yeah. He was totally exonerated. I mean, back then, the story we did, along with a book that was written by Kirk Macon of the Globe and Mail, between these two public efforts, something unusual. His lawyers appealed his conviction, and then they argued successfully that he should be allowed out on bail while the appeal was being heard, because he was going to die in Kingston Bed. And so they let him out. And before he had to go back in, even before the appeal was completed, this primitive DNA of the mid-90s came through with not an exoneration, but it said he didn't do it. We have DNA that is not his. He did not do it. So get him out of there. And it was like only last year, I think, that the DNA had evolved to the point where they now know who did it. They have a name. And it's disgusting. It was a family friend who did it, and Guy Paul. So I remember getting in touch with him when I came out. Guy, let's talk about this in public. And he said, you know what, man? He said, a couple of generations have come and gone since then. He says, right now, he says, nobody knows or cares about Guy Paul Moran, and I don't want to get them all interested again. Because I like to be able to go to the grocery store and buy my groceries. I got a wife and kids. I got jobs. I got, I'm out of my life. I don't want to go back into that. And I said, you know what, buddy? Carry on. I am not going to get in the way of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Separate ways.
Could you ever see yourself writing again as a journalist, getting back into television?
Well, no, that's second part, no. But I am I'm working as a journalist now on a nonfiction book that requires me to open up the old toolkit and research, interview, get around archival stuff, analyze. It's great fun. I miss that part of it.
Do you?
There's no, at the end of the day, it's a historical story, so there's nobody going to sort of be called to account. As a matter of fact, if way it's all shaping up, somebody who has sort of been called to account in the absence of any kind of serious evidence about anything may come out smelling a little better in history than if I didn't do this. But at the end, it is a process that I loved and still do. I mean, the digging, the discovery, the way that a tiny nugget of discovery that might not mean a thing to might not even get in the book, but how it makes your day. Wow, I did not know that, but now I do. And it's just a glorious moment.
And I think as a journalist, when you find that nugget, it's you didn't know that. It's the kind of antidote to your curiosity. It's the gift for being curious in the first place.
I mean, you after a while you realize there's no big bang that's going to wipe out all curiosity and answer everything. It's an incremental thing. You have a big question and you get tiny little bits of answers here and there, and it's certainly you get enough of the tiny little bits, you put it together. It will never give you an absolute certainty, but it will sort of take you very close to the reality of what lies behind the big question.
Can you tell us what your book is about?
I don't want to say too much because it's early stages and it's a historical book, and historians will be looking over my shoulder, and it's about a character who I'll just put it like this: he was involved in World War I, with a distinguished, heroic role in World War I. Because of political friendships he had, he was recruited into the Irish War of Independence, which was a very dirty war. Didn't last long. Lasted his involvement in it was under 2 years. But that 2 years was enough to color the rest of his existence and to completely overshadow everything that happened before it. And it's amazing how, one sort of bad stretch in an otherwise impeccable life casts the whole of life in a particular way, and a negative way. And so I may confirm the negative sense of who this guy was and what he did, or I might say, yes, he did all that, But let's take account of the fact that he lived for 95 years, and that was like less than 2 years in this otherwise normal and sometimes highly commendable life.
Hmm. Well, I hear it's your last book. I hope not, but I've read.
Well, I might not even get to finish it. Life is peculiar. I buried 5 or 6 friends in the last couple of months, so I'm not taking anything for granted.
Yeah, smart. We have many questions, and one of them is, well, there's a lot of highs from Edmonton, Alberta, from London, Ontario, from Sydney, Nova Scotia, from Mississauga, from Milwaukee, Nova Scotia.
This is intense.
So Josh has said we've got a really national audience tonight, and we're very grateful to do that. Port Hope, Ontario, from Toronto, from Vancouver, BC, from Brantford, from North Bay, Deep River, Ontario. You are uniting the country. Judy South.
I didn't even run for anything.
I know, maybe it's time. Okay. Shall we hold your feet to the fire? Would you like to?
Oh.
You can tell us now, right here on Words.
Okay, I'm not going to tell you, but I will tell you, no, I wouldn't be interested.
And Josh has sent a link to the book for everybody on the chat, so you can find it from Random House, which is your publisher. And somebody said that they love the dialogue in the book. You were a gift, Linden. Heartfelt gratitude, my friend. From PEI, somebody's PEI, Thornhill, Ontario, Victoria, BC. Wow, it's amazing. See, this is why the virtual is so important, and it's wonderful that people are enjoying your book really from coast to coast.
I'm touched. I'm really overwhelmed by that, actually, without being racist. I am.
Isn't that wonderful? And somebody's asked about the process, and I wanted to ask about that as well. How do you know when you have a book?
You don't. Somebody tells you, you have a manuscript.
Okay.
And then somebody will say it's a book now. But before that happens, you're going to have to answer a lot of questions. You're going to have to make a lot of changes. One of the things you asked before, how journalism plays into this process. One of the things that journalism develops in you is a thick skin. When somebody offers a critique, everything, contrary to what a lot of people believe, it doesn't just go from your word processor onto the air or whatever. Like, it goes through a process.
Yes.
And it's a tough process. There's a lot of shouting and swearing that goes on in that process. And so you do develop a thick skin, but you also develop a certain humility that you got to listen to what people think. Because if you can't persuade your colleagues that what you're doing has value, how are you going to persuade a bunch of strangers who are just going to see it or hear it or read it? So I forget where I started with that answer, but the process, what was the question again? It was
just, do you have a framework? And you said you start with a manuscript, but what is the actual process? How do you know when you have a book?
You don't know for sure. I mean, you feel in your gut, okay, I've just written the last page of this book. That is the last page. That is going to be the last page. And I've never really had somebody come along and say, I want you to take it a little further. But I always know when I've reached the end of the story. But I'm never the person who's going to be able to say I've reached the end of the process, because the process involves improvement. And everything, no matter how inspired you are, is capable of improvement. And it needs the opinions and the advice and the experience of people who are coming to it fresh. And so I always listen to that, and I go with it. I don't. There's a lot of people will cover their office wall with little cards and notes and stuff. Somebody, I was talking to Terry Follis the other day, and he has like a 90-page outline of what his book is going to be before he actually starts to write it. Wow. And I can't do that. I would go nuts. I come up with an idea that is going to form the legitimacy of the book. And then I come up with a kind of an opening scene. And I just sort of follow the ball characters come along and they get into it. And of course, every character changes things. And at a certain point, you hit a kind of a crisis apex. And then the story starts to unravel a bit towards a conclusion. And it just works every time for me. And then I always have the editor to fall back on that's going to say, well, you know, there's too much here and there's too little there, and fix that and everything is going to be fine.
But that's the journalist in you, follow the ball, because, you know, if you didn't have the journalism training that you have and the experience that you have, you might do it in the way Terry Follis does it.
Yes, I might. I was told, you know, there was an old English professor in Antigonish many years ago, did me a great favor. I was in a creative writing class, and this guy was a published poet and an eccentric old priest who had great gift. And he basically told me, he says, you've got no talent whatsoever for poetry or fiction. So forget it. And I did. And luckily for me, there was another sociologist priest who took me aside one day because I had written an essay on some obscure sociological issue. And he said, you know, you'll never be an academic, but did you ever think of journalism? He says, you got a great way of doing this stuff without, you know, without getting too deep into it. But it's journalism, he said. This paper is journalism. You should look at, and I kind of walked away with that.
Yeah.
Oh, I never thought of that. I was a little boy. I was a boy who delivered newspapers, and I always read them, and I always admired newspapers, and I admired newspaper reporters, but I never thought I could become one.
But how do you become a journalist? Is it that something makes your heart pound when you do an interview and you uncover?
Yeah, it's all different now. I mean, just to get a job now is more difficult than it was when I was starting out, because the availability of jobs has been reduced a lot, and the number of people who want to do the job is huge. But the driving force has always got to be curiosity. You have to have an insatiable curiosity for just about everything. Why did that happen? How did that happen? Who does that affect? Who is accountable for the bad things?
Yeah.
Who deserves credit for the good things? But that central passion of curiosity is what makes the difference.
Yeah.
If you're easily bored, if your interest is not sustained by the curiosity, you become bored and it just falls apart.
Well, you know, you mentioned when you were talking about your book, writing a book, and that you listen to when editors come back to you and say criticism, or give you criticism and give you ideas. And you know, and you talked about listening as a journalist and where that brought you. So important.
Listening, I think in every walk of life, from the very earliest primitive origins of our species, you had to listen for the good, you know, the good signs, the bad signs. You had to listen for the dangers. You had to be prepared to respond to them. You had to take them seriously.
Yeah.
I believe that I could only justify being a journalist and intruding on people's privacy, intruding on their lives, if I am genuinely curious about them. And if I am genuinely curious about them, I gotta, you know, like, I listen.
Yeah.
I listen for what they're saying and how they're saying it, because otherwise I have no right to be there. The curiosity has to be heartfelt and genuine, and people pick up on that. If I'm just in there to exploit a moment in their lives, or exploit a position that they hold, or exploit their goodwill, I'll be out of there with nothing a lot sooner than I want to be. And
everybody has a story. You don't
everybody, Janice, this is the truest thing. I often said to you, you know, when I got to be less than a young reporter, I used to say, you should be able to walk out onto the sidewalk or wherever, stop the first person you see and come back with a story, because everybody has or is a story.
I agree with you 100%. And that's what I find with your characters, that somebody like Byron that you might pass on the street, who you might not think has an interesting story, is a fascinating guy for his foibles.
Yeah, Byron worked in a law office with a whole bunch of people. He was invisible in the law. He was the lame guy. Good to have him here. Looks good. Other than that, he was just this guy sat in his little workspace, head down on boring files, and you know, everybody took him for granted. They had no idea of the capacity of this guy for whatever he turned his mind to.
Yeah. So it's not always the big, great chases that become the best game.
Matter of fact, if you read, anybody reads the book, the Great Chase is the sort of the saddest story of the whole thing, basically.
Mm-hmm.
The great chases, they get off to a great start. Sometimes the things come so easy to them that they don't really understand the importance of engagement with other people, the importance of other people in achieving whatever it is you want out of life. You get there's such a thing as having, it's not great to be sort of uncomfortable and anxious all the time, but there's such a thing as too much confidence in yourself.
For sure. I want to share some more. You're not going to see this otherwise, Linden. So somebody said, enjoy this chat. Somebody else said, I enjoy this so much, would love to see you doing journalism again. You were the best. Oh. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your stories with us, fellow Cape Bretoners. Love your writing. Somebody from Cape Breton wrote that. Somebody else piped in from the west coast of Cape Breton. Where on the East Coast are you from?
West coast of Cape Breton.
Okay, we talked about that before. They may have missed that. So somebody else says, totally agree with having to get along with people in rural areas, whether you like them or not, because you may need their help, support in the future. Thanks for putting that into words. Why did you choose Malignant Cove as an important location in your novel?
That must be somebody from Antigonish County, Nova Scotia. Malignant Cove, I wanted to take the story off of the island a little bit. I have a lot of friends around. If this is somebody who knows Malignant Cove or knows that area, I have a lot of friends, and I spend quite a bit of time around Valentine's Cove and Cape Jack. And Malignant Cove is right around there. And I always thought it was one of the coolest place names in the whole province of Nova Scotia. I said, one of these days, I'm going to use that. but no, I love that part of the East, and it's dramatic. It's the scene where Allan first visits Byron out on the farm, and they're looking out over the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and the drift ice is there, and the fishing boat is down by the shed, and he's just completely, the city guy is completely overwhelmed by all this stuff. And I don't know. I mean, why did you asked, I think earlier, why did I call it The Winter Wives? I don't know. These things sort of jump into your head. And if they stay there, then I figure they got validity. The Malignant Cove sounded like a great place name to sort of summon up some sense of the sort of the mystery and somehow the vulnerability of the place and the people. And so I just used it.
But the landscape, the seascape, the water on the boat, it just, you want to get in the car and drive and go. Love your writings and your intellect. Miss you on the Fifth Estate. Please keep writing. We love all your stories and the depth of your characters. Isn't that nice?
Appreciate that. Thank you.
I thoroughly enjoyed this. I'm grateful for the virtual access. I would never be able to see this otherwise. So that one is for you, Linden, and for Josh Lambier, the organizer, the executive director of Words. Thank you from Stanhope PEI. I love listening to all your stories. I'm originally from, here's another one, originally from Inverness, but now Yellowknife. Somebody else read the book in 2 days, couldn't put it down. Prince Rupert, BC, Sackville, New Brunswick. They keep popping up as I talk. Saskatchewan, Thornhill, Ontario, another one from PEI. You're a gift, Linden. Heartfelt gratitude, my friend from Daria. Love the dialogue again. Hi from Bridgewater, Nova Scotia. I think I mentioned Nova Scotia before, and Deep River, Ontario, North Bay, Ontario, Brantford, Vancouver, Toronto, Port Hope. Have we missed anybody? Mississauga? We do have somebody from London, Ontario, other than me.
Wow. No, I'm deeply moved by all that. I've been doing these things ever since COVID, but I've been all over the place with various books, but I've never really had that kind of warmth coming back at me. So I
Oh.
don't know if I'm going to make it through tonight.
Well, you know what? I'm so glad that we gave it back to you from London, Ontario, and we brought the country together to hear you talk about the Winter Wives and the Bishop's Man and the Wake and Punishment. They are all such great books, and your journalism stories as well. So I thank you so much, Linden, for your time. And
Janice, it's been great. I wish, I'm hoping that the London Festival just thrives and continues, and that we all get to do this in person, even though it will become a little bit more exclusive. There won't be as much access, but maybe we can mix it up and do a kind of a virtual.
yeah, I think to access you in both ways, so, maybe we'll do this on stage in the years to come, and then have a webcast as well so that people can tune in, because, writing unites us all. And, we all get into bed with a good book, and I can't wait for that minute, when I can do that part of my day. And we all feel that way about writers and the places they take us to. And
The good stories unite us all, because we see it like in a good story, for it to be good, it has to address the universality of which we are a part.
Yes.
The emotions that we all understand, the relationships that we all know. I mean, these are the things that make a book a good book.
Yeah.
And these are the things that cause people to take books seriously. It's why I'm so deeply, deeply touched and grateful for this sort of evening, and the sense that this particular book actually did sort of go along the road a fair distance in that business of sort of bringing people together and allowing people access to parts of themselves that they can identify.
Parts of themselves. And I was thinking again, about, we talked about flawed characters, and you've met so many flawed characters in your life that people dismiss, they're, murderers, criminals, whatever. And you uncovered what makes them different, unique, special, interesting, like all of us. And we're all flawed. And I think.
Exactly. And we have to be aware of that. And I think that if we can, without being sort of preachy or sort of like oversharing with people, we have to be able to allow people to see some evidence of the fact that we are aware of our flaws too. If I'm sitting in front of a murderer and the murderer says, this guy's, he could be there, but for the grace of God, he could be sitting where I am, and I could be sitting where he is. And that's true.
Yes, it is
that's
true.
You take nothing for granted about how destiny unfolds.
That's right. Well, we look forward to many more stories, and thanks so much for your time and for joining us at Words, as I said before, the best literary festival on the planet. So spread the word.
I'm inclined to agree now. Thank you.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Thanks everybody for joining us. And
good night, everybody. And thanks for all that.
Many more events from Words, including Wayne Johnston interview on night with Josh Lambier. So sign up. They're all free. Love to have you.
Wayne's an amazing book, man. It's going to be an interesting conversation.
I think so. And thanks for this interesting conversation, Linden.
Okay, Janice, good night. And thank you very much. And thanks everybody for putting up with this and for the appreciation that you've shown. Good night.